Ladies and gentlemen, the story you are about to see is true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent.
Okay, this is the Johnny on the Spot science reporter for the Real News Network. No fake and junk news here. And I'm sitting here with, guess who? Professor Yeats and Lizzy. They have recently escaped prison. And this prison was hidden in a zoo somewhere in the south of Russia.
It was so dirty.
They were being hidden under a grizzly bear cage. And what they did was
kind of scary.
It was kind of scary, yeah.
This was the worst experience of my whole life.
And you were able to escape this by what? By reaching up, pulling hair off the grizzly bear, and from that you were able to make a rope like Rapunzel and climb out of the cage, right?
Yeah.
But you were telling me you felt so bad because
that's how creative we are too. We're really
you were telling me that you felt so bad because the grizzly bear was bald by the time you plucked all its hair.
At least we got escaped. That's the main part. We didn't share science with you guys.
That's right. Because that's right. You're here to share science. And so what you were telling me is you found some really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
And in the last video we talked about the linear trend didn't make sense for temperatures being tied to CO2 because of the physics of the CO2 molecule, right?
Yes.
All right. And as we see here, the change of energy by CO2 is very gradual. This is the amount of energy absorbed. This is the level of CO2. So as you can see, the more CO2 you're adding, the less energy per unit you're absorbing, right?
Yeah.
So you would expect that with higher CO2, the rate of warming to actually slow, not accelerate like what's going on now, right?
Yeah,
exactly. All right. Now, and what you said is this one was the most fascinating chart you've ever seen because none of this chart, on which all of this science, this global warming science is based on, you say is just ripe with fraud.
Yeah.
Right. And so what you're telling me is this chart that started this whole, global warming craze is based on junk science? That's kind of harsh language, isn't it, Professor Yeats?
I know, but it's really harsh.
All right, well, the first thing that you're pointing out is that, as you know, CO2 was pretty much stable for the pre-industrial age, right? You're telling me the CO2 is about 280 parts per million?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
But yet temperatures fell. So how would temperatures fall with stable CO2? So clearly something other than CO2 is causing the temperature change, right?
Yes.
But this is what you said was really suspicious.
Yeah.
Right? You were looking at this, and you said that instrumental data was only used after 1902. And you were telling me the first temperature charts that they've got is Central England, and it starts back in 1650, right?
Yeah.
So why would they not include temperature data that they had in this chart? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If you had temperature data, wouldn't you want to use it?
Yeah.
If you were going to take
You'd
a
wanna
temperature,
use it.
I mean, they went and used what? Coral, tree rings, ice core data, but they ignored temperature data.
Yeah.
So right there,
Weird.
that's the first thing that makes me think this isn't passing the stink test, as you call it, right?
Yeah.
This is smelly like living underneath that grizzly bear cage.
Oh yeah.
That's-
Really definitely. Let's not even talk about that.
But what's kind of interesting is you pointed out that this trend continued of falling temperatures until when? 1902. And it corresponds right when they added temperature data. So what happened? They immediately did a dogleg. Now you were telling me there is nothing in the physics of the CO2 molecule that would ever explain an upward dogleg with CO2, right?
Yeah.
You were telling me it should have been flattening out, not sharply steepening. But the CO2, this dogleg occurs exactly when they add temperature data. And then you said there's another dogleg over here in 1980. And that happened right when they dropped off the proxies, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So what you're telling me is, A, the physics of the CO2 molecule do not justify a dogleg in temperatures ever, right?
Exactly.
It should have been flattening, not steepening. So right off the bat, this chart is not consistent with the physics of the molecule and the absorption of long-wave infrared radiation between 13 and 18 microns. Is that? I mean, I had that right. That's what you were telling me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's what we
So
were
this
talking about.
dogleg doesn't make sense. The fact that they didn't include temperature data doesn't make sense. And the fact that every time they changed their proxies or the construction, the temperature changed. So you could have. So bottom line is what you were telling me is if they would have never added temperature data, this would have just continued going south.
Yep.
Whoa, so basically what it looks to me like they did is it looks to me like they manipulated the data to get the results that they wanted.
Yeah.
Now the other thing is, see this gradual decrease in temperature? Now here's 1650, right? It clearly shows temperature decreasing from 1650 to 1902, right? Now, Professor Bighead or Professor Big Brain, how did you, these are your children you're telling me? How did you get such intelligent children? And how did you get the name Professor Big Brain?
Because my brain is big.
That'll work.
Wow.
Okay, and here's Central England, right?
Yeah,
but you were telling me that on the hockey stick chart, it shows cooling since 1650, and yet the longest term instrumental record we have basically shows no cooling since 1650, but actually temperatures remain flat, even though CO2 has increased. So the best temperature record we have is Central England. It shows no warming. It shows no dog legs. And so this chart alone kind of refutes the hockey stick chart, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow, that's real fascinating.
I know.
So what are we going to say? Like, share, subscribe, comment. Okay? And by the way, because this is Professor Yeats and Lizzy, they were all excited about having more views than the boys' videos.
Yay!
So what they want you... The girls rule. So what they want you to do is share this, pass this around your classroom. And by the way, keep this secret from your teacher. Start the revolution, right? And we're going to sit there and don't obey what the teacher's saying. You sit there and you look for the real truth of the science behind global warming.
Don't give up.
Don't give up. All right. Bye.
You see, the climate change alarmists are not just scientifically wrong and often scientifically illiterate. They are insane. Without CO2, humanity would die from mass starvation. It would be the complete collapse of civilization. And there is no rational scientist who could disagree with any of these statements, because CO2 is necessary for photosynthesis. Plants have no way to survive without CO2. In fact, today plants are starving for CO2 because carbon dioxide is right now at nearly the lowest levels it has ever been in the history of our planet. And yet, if you look at the history of CO2 levels versus average global temperature, you'll find that there is no correlation between high CO2 levels and high average global temperatures. In fact, when CO2 levels were over 15 times higher in Earth's history, the temperature wasn't 15 times higher. It was, in fact, no higher whatsoever than this narrow range in which temperatures have cycled over the last few hundred million years, between about 12 degrees centigrade and 22 degrees centigrade. CO2 is, far from being a pollutant, CO2 is actually the miracle molecule of life for our planet. Without it, we would all die. And yet, because of the climate change propaganda from people like Al Gore or Leonardo DiCaprio, most people think carbon dioxide is dangerous and deadly and a horrible pollutant that must be eliminated. And they demand that you go along with it. And they demand that if you don't agree with their horrifically bad science narrative that claims CO2 is a pollutant, then you must be a bad person and you don't support the greening of the planet. People, CO2 is the molecule that creates a green planet. Don't you get it? They've got it all backwards on purpose. They've convinced you that this molecule of life that grows more plants and more trees and more forests is somehow a pollutant. And if you've been swept up in the climate change narrative, you need to look in the mirror and you need to ask yourself, how were you so easily fooled? Why were you suckered into that narrative by Al Gore and Leonardo DiCaprio and other celebrities who are scientifically illiterate but famous actors? They don't know anything about science. Finally, every time you exhale, you are exhaling carbon dioxide. Every organic molecule in your body is made of carbon. If you don't understand that carbon is essential to all life as we know it on our planet, then you too are a danger to life on this planet. You must stop being so easily misinformed. A high carbon dioxide planet is a green planet, and a low carbon dioxide planet is a dead planet. It's time for you to recalibrate what you think you know about carbon dioxide, because everything you've been told by the status quo is not just wrong, but dangerous and even deadly.